I just wanted to make a quick video on doing the oil change in a 2001 F250 Super Duty with the 5.4 Triton engine. It takes 6 quarts of oil. I'm running Castrol 5W30. The previous owner was running Castrol, and the truck has 293-ish thousand miles, and it still runs smooth and quiet, doesn't leak any oil or burn any, so I figure why change what's working. And it's pretty cheap at Walmart. The truck technically calls for 5W20, I believe, but from some research, the higher mileage engines prefer 5W30, so that's what I've chosen to run. For a filter, I like the Fram Ultra Synthetic. They seem to be a good quality filter, and in my opinion, about the best bang for your buck you can get. You'll need a ratchet and a 17mm socket, and then an oil drain pan to put your oil in. Okay, so now we are under the truck. Before crawling under the truck, make sure that it is in either park or first gear reverse if you have a manual with the e-brake on. And if you're on a hill, make sure to chock the wheels. You don't want the truck rolling on you. To start out with, you want to find the oil pan. The oil drain plug is on the driver's side of it. And make sure you have your drain pan under it, and a little bit to the left of it. The oil likes to shoot out sideways. Also, to start out with, I like to have run the truck for 5 to 10 minutes before trying to do the oil change. I find that helps the oil to flow out easily and to get all of it. I went ahead and loosened this off camera, but you want to get this plug removed. It's going to try to seep out. You can kind of see where it's, as it drips there, where it'll go. But you want it, I like to always have it about an inch from the edge, because then when it shoots out with pressure, it typically sort of stays in the oil pan. I like to pull the drain plug out with my fingers instead of with a socket, because you have less chance of dropping the drain plug. I like to go 1 or 2 turns past where I think the threads are off, and then quickly pull it out sideways. And you can see that barely is in the pan. Now that we are topside on the truck, after pulling the drain plug, I like to release the top cap and just let it sit there for the oil fill. That way there's no suction holding it in. I also forgot to mention at the beginning of this video, having an oil filter wrench can really save your knuckles. You can do it without it, but if you weren't the last one to do the oil change on it, I would have one of these going into it, because oil change shops typically tend to put these filters on way too tight. Okay, now we are bottom side of the truck again. At this point, your oil, by the time you get back down here, probably is just barely dripping. I like to move the drain pan to where it's on the other side now and just barely dripping into it. That way, if you accidentally drop your filter that is right to the driver's side of your oil drain plug while you're unscrewing it, you don't dump it in your oil, hopefully, and cover yourself with oil. Not fun. I already went ahead and loosened this with the wrench. Do that, it'll start leaking oil. But basically, you go ahead and grab this and twist. This one's already loose, but we'll let that go ahead and drain. Okay, it is pretty much only dripping now. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it the rest of the way. Wearing gloves isn't a bad idea, especially if you don't like to get your hands messy. Okay, go ahead and put that right there. So, leak some more oil. Typically I don't get quite as covered in oil in that, but holding a camera and doing it one-handed, I don't have quite as much control over it as I normally do. At this point, I like to come out and at some point, it doesn't really matter when, inspect your drain plug. Make sure you don't have any metal shavings or metal flake on it. That can give you an early warning sign if something's wrong with your engine. Then I like to just wipe it off with toilet paper or a napkin or a shop towel or whatever. Okay, we are bottom side now. That is barely still dripping, but not enough to really matter. So after we have cleaned this off, your drain plug, I like to go ahead and put that back in at this point. I like to put it in with my hand as far as I can. That way you make sure you don't get it cross-threaded. Then we'll finish it off with the ratchet. If you aren't familiar with how much to tighten these things down, I would, if you have a torque wrench, look up the torque setting and go with that. If not, I like to kind of put my hand close to the ratchet, and kind of hard doing it with my left hand, but close to the head on the ratchet, and only put as much torque into it as I can with my left arm, and not even the whole amount. You don't want it super tight. If you strip a thread out, that is not good. But they're pretty tough, so be careful with that. If you aren't familiar, I'd get a torque wrench and do it the right way. I'm going to jump off camera so I have both hands to do this. I realized I just said use one hand and then I said both hands, but basically I was at the wrong angle trying to hold the camera to do it with my left hand at that angle. At this point, the next thing you want to check is, with your oil filter off, make sure that there is no seal right here, and I'll show you what I mean by that when we come out. But if the rubber seal gets left here from your oil filter, that can be a big deal, because then your oil leaks out and you can blow up an engine if you aren't watching. Okay, this is your old oil filter, and this is the seal I was referring to. Sometimes, normally, these come out with the filter, but about 30% of the time, they get stuck on the engine block or engine housing, oil filter housing, depending on how your engine's set up. And if two of these get stacked together, they do not create a seal, and at least in my experience, they don't. And from people I've talked to, and so that can be a leak point for oil, and it can be bad. Okay, so at this point, let's get your new oil filter out of the box. I have had oil filters that I have gotten that have had rust in them, so I like to make sure that there's not any major rust on it. I'm not saying that it would be catastrophic if you did, but if you're putting a new oil filter on, I like to make sure there isn't any. Then let's take some new oil, and this is an old jug I have from leftover from the last oil change, but it's new oil, and fill up your oil filter just about a third to half of the way full. Camera's focusing weird. Because that can make sure that you get oil in to your engine faster. So you filled up a little bit, third to halfway full. Like on my Dodge 360, the oil filter is canted at a really bizarre angle, kind of like that. And so you can't fold up very full. This one, it's pretty close to straight up and down, so you can actually fill it halfway and not have any problems. Typically I spill a little on this seal, and that is actually good, because if you don't, then get some and take your finger or glove or something and rub it around that seal. That makes sure that you get a good seal and none leaks out. Okay, now we are under the truck again with your pre-filled and oil on your seal oil filter. And let's just go ahead and screw this on. It can be a little bit interesting with one hand and trying to get the right angle on those threads, since they never seem to put them straight up and down. Okay. This part, again, you don't want it too loose. You also don't want it too tight. They seem to tighten a little bit over time in my experience. So I don't put them on too crazy tight, but decently. Okay, so now we're topside again. Before coming out from under the truck that last time, I like to always make sure that I put my drain plug in and didn't get distracted with something. And then we want to go ahead, take this off. And one thing I should have mentioned is it's also really handy to have either a funnel or a paper plate. What I like to do if I don't have a funnel handy, mercy, is kind of make a funnel out of the paper plate. And you can hold it with one hand, and that'll, keep you from spilling your oil. I'm not going to show me dumping it in because I only have two hands and I need one to hold the funnel and one to hold the oil. Okay, so at this point, we've added our oil. You're probably going to spill some. I did. Let's go ahead and clean that up. And then also I like to wipe off this rim, being careful not to wipe the dust into the oil. And also, let's go ahead and take your oil cap and wipe that off, the top of it here. That can give you an indication if it has milkiness or a sludge of what's going on with your engine health. And I just like to examine that at each oil change and then wipe it off to kind of start with a fresh, clean slate. And then let's go ahead and put that back on. I like how these click. Not all of them do. And, to tell you when they're tight enough. And then at this point, because we know we've added our 6 quarts, I like to go ahead and start it and let it idle. Don't rev it up or drive it at all for the first, minute or two. And then I'll turn it off and check the oil to make sure that, I have the oil level exactly where I want it. Okay, so we are in the truck at this point, and I know I mentioned how many miles it has. 293, 297 to be exact. Okay. For me, I'm going to go ahead and shift to neutral to start it. I have a little bit of a transmission issue right now that I might make a video on fixing that. So I have to start in neutral a lot of the time. But we will let it idle for a second. I realized I should probably also mention that service engine soon light is on for the transmission issue. It has nothing to do with the oil change. Okay, so after letting it run for a minute, we're going to go back around outside the vehicle, this time to the driver's side of the rig instead of the passenger side where you dump the oil in. And we will pull the dipstick, and we will, I can't do this with without two hands, but we will take some toilet paper, shop towel, whatever, and wipe the dipstick off, and then we'll put it back in to get an accurate reading for how much oil we still need to add. Okay, I don't know if you can see this. I had a hard time getting the camera to focus on the dipstick. But there's the 2 dots, and you want the oil right at the top of the second highest, or the second dot, or the highest dot. You can see it looks like it's about there, maybe a smidge high, but that's not concerning to me. I tried to do oil changes every 3,000 miles. Unfortunately, this was closer to 4,000 or 5,000, but in that amount of time, in 5,500 miles-ish, it went through, I'm going to say, a half a quart to a quart. So being about a quarter quart high there isn't a concern. But you want to make sure it's at least in the middle of the checkered area. I don't know if the camera will focus in on enough for you to see, but if you're doing this, it's pretty obvious in between the 2 dots. Okay, so at that point, go ahead, put the dipstick back in the truck, and make sure this is tightened on, and you are good to go. One thing I do like to sometimes do when I do the oil change is to check to make sure that I still have enough coolant. We're just running it, so probably not a good idea to do after you run it. Do this before, because you don't want it to spray in your face. But make sure the coolant looks clean, and it actually is a bit dirty right there. Also check the underside of this cap, make sure that doesn't look like a milkshake or all black. The coolant in here, it's a little bit, dark greenish and kind of dirty, but it's not concerning. It needs changed eventually, but. And also make sure that it's at the right level. Mine is actually about a ½ inch low. It's fall. I'll get it handled before it freezes up, but that is pretty much the only other thing I can tell you to check. I would recommend checking your oil. If your truck doesn't burn any, even if it doesn't, I would still check it the first time or two after you do the oil change before you drive it each day, just to make sure that it wasn't reading falsely. Sometimes they do that right after an oil change. But after that, you're good to go. If you have any comments or questions, please leave it in the comments, and I will try to answer it if I can. Thank you. Thanks for watching.